And we're live, hopefully. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. It's Thursday night, just coming up to 9 o'clock. We've popped on a wee bit early. And tonight here on the station, we thought we'd begin with our science fiction book club with Dune, Frank Herbert's Dune. So I hope there's some people there joining us tonight. We're going to work away and start approaching this book. So I know there's a lot of interest in Dune at the minute because of Denis Villeneuve's film, and it is a rather kind of watered down, seriously cut down version of Frank Herbert's book. And we've had a few requests basically to have a look at this book, try and do some kind of Dune book club with it, and basically try to help you guys understand the book a wee bit better and try and get some insight into the matter. So today's episode really is just the start of the book club, and I thought we'd have a wee bit of a chat about Frank Herbert's Dune and how best to proceed. So there's Joseph. Hello from Washington State, USA. Hi, Joseph. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, I don't know. As I said, somebody asked me the other week, are you going to do a sort of episode 0, if you like, to set up the club? And I said, sure. It's basically I think it was Brad from Australia saying, "Oh, I've not been part of a book club before," or anything like that. And as I was saying, neither have I. But I used to teach this kind of stuff. And if you're going to have I suppose, a look at Dune with anybody, then arguably I'm one of the best people to do it with. There's Babs Milo. Hello, Babs. How's it going? Babs is saying, "Evening, Doc." So much to my chagrin, I've had to go and buy a new copy of Dune. Sadly, as you know, I've actually wrecked quite a few copies over the years, and this is the one I've picked up in the shops, which is, I was trying to get a second-hand one, and sadly all the shops are quite devoid of it. But as you may know, over the years I've never managed to excuse me, never managed to get a set of Dune books, all the same covers ever. So it might be possible for me to do so. And my most recent copy, which would have been the last of my workbooks, has literally fallen to pieces in my hands, and which is a sad state of affairs, because I actually do write as a former academic, I suppose. I would write on books quite a lot, and I love my books. Don't get me wrong. If there's a book that I particularly love, I'll have a nice edition of it that I'm not going to write on. And I have one copy of Dune that it's a nice book, and I'm not going to write on it, if you see what I mean. But when it comes to doing this kind of book, I suppose like a close study maybe, and I'm going to try and make it as informal as possible. But I like to scribble all over a book. Excuse me. Chaya Rivka saying hello, and Tazat Israel is here. Not too sure if I'm pronouncing the place name there right. Zafat, maybe. Israel is here. Excellent. Welcome, Chaya. Pronunciation is going to be a little bit of a thing, I think, throughout this as well, because we're going to be dealing with a lot of words from lots of different languages and culture. And it's one of those things that makes Dune particularly interesting. I want to actually talk a wee bit about the book itself. So, I mean, we're going to be able to work together a chapter at a time on this. And I'm quite a bit of a pedant, as you may understand. So I have already sort of begun annotating, and I've worked all the way through the first chapter. And at the minute, as you may have seen, I'll just show you roughly how I work at these books. This is what I've been doing to my brand new copy of Dune. And for your bit, this has turned out to be quite a nice wee thing, actually, folks. So I've got myself a really big chunky notebook, and I've just decided to annotate the heck out of this thing. And I've managed to do quite a bit of work already, just on the first chapter, because I suppose as Dune begins, it is important to get a sense of things correct, and there's so much going on. And so I've been doing this kind of little thing, creating a little book for our book club as we go, which I think it's going to look quite interesting by the time we're done. Excuse me. Bob says, "I feel you on the writing and the falling apart books." Yes, my copy of Nico McCain Ethics of Aristotle is a mess. Your poor books, laughing out loud. Yeah. Oh, my Nico McCain Ethics. I have one copy. I have a kind of modern copy left. but my old one has gone bye-bye. I'm a big fan of Nicomachean Ethics. Anybody doesn't know what Nicomachean Ethics are, it's Aristotle's second work on ethics in his lifetime, and it's called the Nicomachean Ethics because it's named after his son, who I believe published it. And it's the more kind of grown up, if we would like, Aristotelian ethics. But for us in particular, it's an interesting thing because it contains the definition of politics, which is a bit of a part of what we're going to look at in Dune, I suppose. Politics being the science of the happiness of mankind, where the happiness of the individual is subservient to the happiness of the state, I think is Aristotle's definition of politics. So there you go. Sorry, I'm drifting already, folks. But what I thought I'd do today is just sort of set things up, and I think the whole point of this, as much as we have you guys on live chat there, is to bring as many people into this as possible, I suppose. And if you have any questions at any point, fire away. And the objective really is to immerse ourselves in these books and try and do it in a light-hearted way. By the way, I know I'm a bit detailed, but I think particularly when we start to look at Dune, there's an awful lot to take in, and its reputation is, I suppose, a complex book. It's some people look at it as being complicated to read, which I don't agree. I think it's a nice, easy read. I think it's an enjoyable read, and Dune is meant to be one of these terms of Bildungsroman. It's in a sense, it's a coming-of-age novel. So as much as it's a book that sits very comfortably with adults, it's kind of demographic in a sense as the young teenage male market of the time. So there we go. So I thought just having a look at the book itself and breaking it up and having a wee chat about how best to read. Today we'll get started today, and I hope that we'll be here Thursdays and Sundays every week at 9 o'clock to chat and see how quickly we can move. Without wishing to rush through it. There's Stevie Campbell saying, "Evening, Doc." Hi, Stevie. Excuse me. Hope you're keeping well. Thanks for joining us. So, I'll just to let you know, I've managed to get I've got to manage to get 113 notes on the first chapter, and a bunch of notes just on the book before we've even got started. So, I suppose we'll give it a wee bit of introduction. But if anybody's just joining us fresh tonight, I suppose I think the best way to say is that for each week as we go, we'll read one chapter, and we'll go from epigraph to epigraph, if you like. There are no chapter numbers in Dune, so simply put, each chapter begins with an epigraph written by the Princess Erawan, and those take us through our chapters. So they'll give us a good place to start and stop each time as we progress. And the first chapter in my edition of Dune's about 9 pages long. I think I've written about 20 pages worth of notes on it. And so we'll have a wee chat about it, I suppose. And just for anybody who is joining us and who doesn't know me a wee bit, excuse me, science fiction academia is a sort of part of my background. And I'm also a classicist, if that means anything to anybody, once upon a time. And I'm a computer scientist. So a long time ago, I did my PhD on Frank Herbert's Dune series. And I've since turned it into a bunch of videos on YouTube. So if anybody is interested, there's plenty of background work that I've done on this, basically a whole PhD published in its entirety. And it's on the Science Fiction Station, our little YouTube channel. So we're quite small. We're kind of low-key and off the radar a bit. And it's quite an intimate little crowd we have. We have a regular sort of, I think we have a couple of thousand subscribers. But we have a regular about 100, 120 people that are popping in and out of the station, as I like to call it, all the time. So our love of Dune and our love of science fiction is what we're here for. And we do different things on the station. We do some videos and we do some audiobooks. But the main focus of what we've been at since we started about a year and a half ago, I think, has been getting this work up on Frank Herbert's Dune. And of course, the interest in it has exploded with Denis Villeneuve's film and so on. So if for anybody who's new to Dune, we have playlists on the Science Fiction Station, and we have them done as individual episodes. So we have what's called the Dune series Piled Higher Than Deeper, and there's about 36 episodes there, and it's the PhD broken up, excuse me, into small manageable chunks, and everything's referenced and has where to find all this kind of information, etc. So if anybody is interested, just to get the ball rolling, if you don't know anything about Frank Herbert, our third episode on the station is a biography of him. And our, I suppose, or sorry, no, our fourth episode, no, third is correct. And our fourth and fifth episodes kind of put him in his historical context, if you're interested in finding out a wee bit more about him. He's considered one of the big four science fiction writers, excuse me, of the 20th century. And he's in part recently he's been relegated to what we call the big three, and that's a bit of science fiction academics at their work. But the idea of the big four is science fiction writers who became household names, and was based upon their novel sales. That they became household names because of the sales of their books. And up until that time, the kind of common way for a lot of these science fiction writers, Frank and Herbert included, was to get published in the American magazines. And so if anybody's interested, we have a wee bit of a biography about Frank Herbert over there. And there's history of his sort of what you would call a literary biography. It's a history of the books that he's written and published over the years. And it kind of puts him in his place a wee bit. So it's just good to know. Excuse me. Also good to know that I tend to have a bit of a froggy throat, and I do apologize. And we like to mitigate with precious fluids. But it's just good to know where he's at in terms of science fiction history, because he's, I suppose you could see his career beginning in what we call the new wave, what we call the golden age of science fiction. I prefer the term Campbellian era, and which is to do with Joseph Campbell. John Wood Campbell Jr. Not that, yeah, the other one we're getting. There's a couple of J. Campbells in here that we'll talk about, who's the editor of Analog Magazine, for example, and Amazing Stories and things like that. So there's a time and a place for Dune, and it seems to sit right in, my thesis is that it's a bridge between the golden age and what we call the new wave. And it's a book that inspires a lot, I think, to do with the new wave. Excuse me. And I will check in on comments as I gab away, folks, here every now and then. And if anybody does have any questions about how we're going to proceed. So from my point of view, I think best for tonight, I'm going to be introducing the book and chatting a wee bit about how the book's set up and how it's organized, how the story works, and how do you approach reading the thing. Because what's really important about Dune is it's a book that works on many different Sorry, it works on many different levels, and you can read it in different ways. I think I said previously on the channel when we were chatting about this, one of the things I think might be interesting as we do this, as we progress, and the aim is to go through all 6 books. Yeah, lucky me. But basically, the idea is to take you all the way through them. But there may be some of you out there who want to read these books in a different way or in a particular way. I'm going to try my best to cover everything and as many different points of view as possible in terms of looking at the books and point out the different aspects of it to you. But some of you might want to approach this, for example, from an ecological point of view. Dune's really famous. Its greatest fame is from ecology, this major theme of ecology. Some of you might want to look at it as a critique and a study of the hero. There's a feminist approach to it. There's a psychological approach to it. In fact, there's all sorts of ways of looking at it. There's a political approach to it, arguably. Let me see. You could even look at it in terms of counterculture. It explores ideas of and I'd also say, by the way, one of the things that's really important, I think a lot of people don't realize this about Dune, is it's an anti-war book, and that's another way of approaching it. Herbert's ideas of war tied into evolution, sex, gender, etc., etc. So there's a whole range of ways that any one of us can look at this book. Excuse me. And I have to tell you, this is Frank's deliberate intention. That he talks about this as creating a set of themes that are like threads in a tapestry. And his idea, I'm not quoting him exactly, but is that they weave together so tightly that they're difficult to unravel upon further inspection. So this is the thing about it. You can read it as almost a melange of these themes. For sorry for the word use of the word, a lovely blend of them. But it is possible to tease them apart and read Dune in a particular way. Some of you guys might be wanting to approach it from a particular way. It's got so much in it. I'll just check a few comments here, folks, so that I can keep in touch with what's running along. Babs is saying you have a world-class zoo and art museum. Is that Ohio? Just says, I'll need copies of the rest of the Frank Dune books for when we begin the rest of the saga. I'm always excited to buy books. Yeah, I was quite surprised, Joseph, about finding it hard to find a second-hand copy of Dune around town, because it's one of those books that I used to argue is always in second-hand bookshops. There's Cynthia saying, hi from the US, long-time Dune reader, looking forward to the book chats. Excellent, Cynthia. Thank you very much for joining us. Babs Bello, all 6 of Frank's books are available as audiobooks now on YouTube, will likely be struck soon. Oh, that's sad. Yeah, I suppose that's another thing, folks. Some of us might not be reading along, but if we're listening along with audiobooks, whatever the medium, hopefully you'll be wanting an unabridged copy of Frank Herbert's Dune. Yeah, as Babs is saying, a lot of this stuff does pop up on YouTube, but it disappears generally because of copyright. But I do imagine there are original copies of Dune on audio, but we would want unabridged ones. I have to say, but we'll be running through the actual book pretty tightly, I think. There's David Segovia saying hello to everybody. Hello, David. Thanks for joining us. And available, Babs just saying that's available on the Glen Keys No Spaces channel. So, yeah, folks, as I said, we're kind of new to this, but the idea is, and as I said, for next week, if you've either started reading Dune, if we're happy enough to proceed with the first chapter, we'll run through a few things today. But otherwise, we're going to aim for, reading the first chapters where we want to be at the minute, and we're going to have a good old look at it. I'm going to run through a few wee things, actually, but just in general publication terms. And as I said, some of us might be new to this book, and if you are, let me know. By the way, if we've got new readers or old favorite, people who are returning to the book again and again, it is a book that rewards the reader who returns to it, I think. The other thing we'll just briefly say is, I think for those of us who do know the Dune series, there are drop-off points in the books that readers naturally seem to leave the series at. And in particular, Dune itself, a lot of readers haven't got past it, and they're in for a big shock, I have to say, because Dune is pretty much a deceit against the reader by Frank Herbert, and it's an attempt to imprint a certain idea upon the reader that he then inverts in the second book. So Dune Messiah is quite a short, political, I'd say arguably Machiavellian kind of book. Excuse me. And then we have Children of Dune, which make up the first Dune trilogy. And the original Dune series was conceived this way by Frank. So some people, again, have covered the first 3 books, and there was a natural ending point there. And it was a natural point for them to drop off. God Emperor of Dune seems to be a bit of a polarizer, and it tends to be a book that is, I think, arguably the favorite of a lot of Dune series readers. It's definitely a different animal. And it came out in 1981, and we have then the last 2 books, excuse me, of the Dune series, which are known as the Bene Gesserit books. They're Heretics of Dune and Chapter House Dune. And this also tends to be a point where some readers just, because there's such a massive time jump, there's different reasons for them to jump off. And I suppose they just find it hard to follow in a wee bit. It's a pity, because you do stick to them. Again, they're very rewarding. They're very good books. And of course, we get through the Dune series with an absolute cliffhanger of an ending. And for what we consider, I suppose, canon by Frank Herbert, we'll never, ever know. It's one of those books that, sadly, Frank died before being able to finish the series. Excuse me. I'll take some fluids as I'm gabbing away here. So, of course, we do have the Brian Herbert, Kevin J. Anderson continuation of the series. Somebody on YouTube sent me a list the other day of, goodness, it was all the stories in the Dune series, I think, including the extended universe now. And I think that Dune, as being the first story there, was the 23rd story in order. And I think it must be nearly 50 properties or something like that within the Dune universe these days. I was quite impressed by how many there were. So we do have a conclusion to the original Dune series by Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Herbert, and that's The Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune books that are published in 2006 and 2007. So for myself, whenever I was doing my work, excuse me, my Dune PhD, I started that in 2006. So I began my work, as I said, my focus was on Frank Herbert, and they appeared at the time. So whenever I was doing it, it was interesting to have a look at them and see what sort of conclusion that they went for. And it kind of logically fitted, I suppose, in some ways. There's a lot of readers that are not satisfied with it. And Kevin J. Anderson, Brian Herbert's Dune Universe extension seems to be a polarizing thing within Dune fandom, with some loving the books, etc. And I suppose I think some of the main criticisms of their work is that they don't sound like Frank Herbert. They don't have the authorial voice, and that the more additions and prequels, etc., that they add to the stories, then the more, I suppose, contradictions and paradoxes that appear within the narrative. Just within Frank Herbert's Dune universe, one other book that requires comment in terms of the original, what we might call canon, something that Frank considered canon, is, of course, the Dune Encyclopedia, published in 1984 by Professor Willis E. McNally and 42 other contributors. Is a wonderful, wonderful book and an excellent addition to the original Dune universe. For any reader, I highly recommend it. It's starting to get difficult to get a hold of. And we've set up our set, by the way, a wee bit here. We've got a copy of Dune in the background. There it is. And we've got a bunch of our Frank Herbert works here. And just in case we actually need to, I thought we'd try and do our best to be as professional about this as possible. We've got a whole stack of science fiction reference books here over to the left, if we need to look stuff up. So who knows? And there might be some people out there who are joining us who've got the odd speciality who can help us out with finding out the meaning of some words and things like that. But we're basically going to give this our damnedest, really, and have a good old go at it. And hopefully we can all enjoy it. And I want it to be as fun as possible. And as I said, as many contributions from you guys as possible. So Dune itself, of course, we're famous for this. It's a Hugo and Nebula Award winner, and it picks up the first Nebula Award winner award in 1965 for best novel, and it shares the 1966 Hugo with, I think, and Call Me Conrad, if I can remember correctly. I wish I'd written that down. I must check that. Dune is also, we're told, it's voted consistently the greatest, the best science fiction novel of all time, or the GOAT, as this term I keep hearing, the greatest of all time. I myself did some research into this and even looked at New Scientist magazine a wee while back, who polled a bunch of scientists on their favorite science fiction novel, and consistently Dune is the winner of this prestigious title amongst fans, amongst scientists, amongst all sorts of people. Dune is the best science fiction book there is. The other thing that goes with that statement is that it's also considered the best-selling science fiction book of all time. That's not even remotely true. It's possible with the global interest in the film that things could change, but I think there's a couple of books that certainly sell well beyond it. Excuse me. And I would argue 1984 is a science fiction book. And again, it's to do with how long these books have been on the market. And generally, sometimes if they're taught in schools, so if your book is taught in schools, it's a perennial seller. But and I know Dune is taught in a lot of American schools, but something like 1984 has been on the reading list in a lot of schools globally, I think, for a long, long time. It's a massive seller. Chai is saying, my issue with Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson is that they just aren't as talented as Frank. They take paragraphs to say what Frank could convey in a sentence, and the endless repetition, tedious. Joseph says, as long as the tedium has the word Dune somewhere, I will be happy. Excuse me. Yeah, it does. We joke a wee bit about it here and there that the next book will be sort of, I don't know, public payphones of Dune or something like that. It is certainly a franchise that's being milked. But it's part of the nature of the business these days, I think. I'm not too sure what to think about it. I suppose the one comment we do know is that the Herbert estate, in terms of Willis C. McNally's book, for anybody who is joining us, let's just bring it down here. I've got myself a bit organised tonight. We have a few different things. There we go. Usually when I'm trying to talk about a book, I've no idea where it is and we go a running. We do have Frank Herbert by Timothy O'Reilly. We're going to be mentioning it a wee bit in a moment. But this is the Dune Encyclopedia, published in 1984. As I said, there's a PDF versions of it online, and I'm happy to send somebody a copy. But it's over 500 pages, illustrated, and it has a lovely introduction by Frank Herbert, etc. And it's just a great book for the Dune fan, and it's kind of what Chai is saying. It feels as it has the right voice. There's an attempt. It feels right. It fits well with the Dune universe, and the same as Frank's voice. I've had a wee bit of a chat about this before, but it's very difficult for some authors to write in another author's universe, and there are writers who are good at it and have done very well at it. But it's a very difficult thing to do, I think. There's Corey Van Over saying, greetings from America, newly subscribed, huge Dune Books fan. I love your content. What are your thoughts on the Audible versions with Simon Vance, Scott Brick, etc.? I haven't heard them, Corey, I'm afraid. Goodness, I have I wouldn't mind listening to them, actually, to be honest. So I don't know if I'd love to hear your opinions on them. Are they any good? I'd heard some old versions of Dune from years ago that were kind of, I don't know, I think they were off the Pirate Bay or something, and they were not good quality. But I don't think they were. I'm not too sure who made them, to be honest. So no, I haven't heard them. Must check them out. Audible. In terms of audiobooks, I have a bit of a sleep disorder, so I kind of use the same audiobook to get the audio dramas to get the sleep every night. Which I'm permanently stuck on old Harry's game, I'm afraid. But I'll be quite interested in checking them out. So I don't know what they're like. I'm sure maybe there's a few other people who've had a listen to them. And as Babs is saying, howdy, Corey, welcome to the Doghouse. Yeah. So our science fiction station is also known as the Doghouse, folks, and occasionally we'll get interrupted by my doggies, who you can maybe see on the photo here as Evil Noodles and Holly Holiday. So we joke that we're a science fiction space station, and the Doghouse is a reference to the space station from Strontium Dog, if anybody knows this, from 2000 AD. So thanks for joining us, Corey, and if anybody let us know what those audiobooks are like. I have to say, I haven't taken up. I keep getting off this free Audible trial, and I don't really try it out, but I do have some old audiobooks and stuff. I'm actually that busy trying to make them these days. So it isn't the best-selling science fiction book of all time, but there's a good chance it'll get there, I think. And I just thought I'd have a wee look at this. Is the paperback that I'm going to be working with. I imagine if whatever trade paperback, etc., you're using, or hardback copy, the way we're going to be working with the book club is each chapter begins with one of these epigraphs, as I'm sure you all know. So we'll go from epigraph to epigraph, starting with chapter 1. And I just thought I'd chat a wee bit about how the book is set up, first of all. And I think this paperback that I've got is, I suppose it's the Hodder 50th anniversary edition. I think the ones that I had before would be Hodder and Stoughton, isn't it? I think they're still the same company. Let me see. So just interesting, obviously it's not the 50th anniversary edition or 50th anniversary of Dune at the minute. We're heading towards the 60th, arguably next year. But it has the new logo, if you like, which I'm not a massive fan of. And I've just made a wee note that the logo are, the new Dune logo, I suppose, that they're symbols from set theory, aren't they? with the dot, and that they're also meant to spell it. So I think the Duncan in joke, I think, is a little bit. There's a couple of wee points I wanted to make out about this edition. This is, I think, one of the first editions that I've owned that doesn't have Arthur C. Clarke's famous blurb, if you know what I mean, about this is Dune. So the dedication, what is it? Most copies of Dune that I know, the main selling point, the really magical selling point, yeah, that sounds amazing, is a quote by Arthur C. Clarke. And it always says, it's unique amongst science fiction novels. I know nothing comparable to it except The Lord of the Rings. And I suppose I was kind of wondering why it's not on. Why is it not on this copy? And maybe all of you out there have got different copies of Dune. I'm just kind of curious, is it on or is it not? But it's a very good selling point from one of the other big four, if you see what I mean. Instead, I suppose we have soon to be a major motion picture. And interestingly enough, I was just looking at the publication date, and there is no date for this edition, which is a bit sad. But just in terms of breaking it up, Dune itself, hang on, just catch up here. Let's see. This is just a wee comment. Corey had asked about whether I'd heard the audiobooks, which I haven't. So I was asking people's opinions on them. Excuse me. Colleges and Camels Radio. Old Harry's Game is excellent. Yes, Old Harry's Game is. I think it's the funniest. I'm going to go with science fiction show, because I suppose it's kind of about humanism and so on, isn't it? But science fiction, fantasy, horror, I don't know. But I think it's got elements of science. I think it's a science fiction show. I think it's funnier than The Hitchhiker's Guide, consistently funnier, I suppose. Though I'd argue it probably appeals more to a British audience than a global audience because of some of the people that are parodied in it. But everybody's in hell, pretty much. It's a very funny. I think there's 7 series of it. So yeah, highly recommend it. By the way, if anybody's not heard of it, Old Harry's Game. Old Harry would make quite a good comparison. Old Harry, of course, another nickname for the devil, but the devil in particular in Old Harry's Game would make an interesting character to compare to the God Emperor, I think. Very, very funny show indeed. Corey Van Oversen, this is in relation to the audiobooks. Babs is saying this is the ones by featuring Simon Vance, etc., and Scott Brick. Let me see. Babs saying, I adore the audiobooks. The voices are great, and Simon Vance is a jewel. And Corey Van Oversen, they get better as you get to Heretics of Dune and Chapter House Dune. Original Dune is hard to digest with the theatrical production style. I love them all, though. And Corey's just agreeing with Babs. So good production on them, I think, is what matters. Colleges and Camels, I'm late on here today, and do not let me interrupt your flow, but I'm wondering if you have any structure for this club laid down on a site. Not as such yet. We're sort of how do we talk about it? I'm trying to get a lot of things done for this at the minute, guys. I'm super busy without kind of neglecting some of the other stuff. But the idea is really that this is an introductory night, and that we're going to, for each night, we'll aim to read the first chapter. We'll proceed a chapter at a time, but we might not get through a chapter in each, I suppose, each show, or whatever you want to call it. So tonight really was about how best to proceed. And of course, if anybody misses this, we'll put these up, and we're going to organize them into a playlist on the channel. But yeah, at the minute, for anybody who's just joining us, we're going to talk through about how to proceed and have a wee look at the book tonight. Excuse me. So basically, for each night, if you guys want to read the first chapter, that's what we're really going to tear into. And there's an awful lot to deal with in the first chapter. It's really setting up the show, isn't it? Once we're ready to go on to chapter 2, we'll move on. I've got about 100. As I said, I've worked out about 113 comments just on chapter 1, and I've a few before we've even started the first chapter. So I'm not too sure how quickly we're going to go through this, guys. But the idea is really to pick it apart in a nice way and in a fun way, not too pedantic, I hope, and have a bit of fun with it and discuss what Frank's up to and how the story works, I think, and really just hopefully open our eyes a wee bit. Um, David says, Doc, can you describe Dune Messiah? You described Dune Messiah as a Machiavellian book. Can you expand more this idea? Machiavellianism, I suppose it's to do with Niccolo Machiavelli. And if you want to have a wee look at him on Google, he's famous for a couple of books, but the main one is The Prince. And you could argue it's about Machiavellian, I suppose, would be a synonym for political skullduggery, if that's want of a better term. Have I got Machiavelli about? Let me see. I've got The Prince here. But he also wrote, he's not the be all and end all as old Machiavelli. He also wrote a book, think it now, let me get, it's either On War or The Art of War. There are a bunch of people who write books on war. Not to be, so we've got von Clausewitz's book is On War. I mean, Sun Tzu's book is The Art of War. I think Machiavelli's is also called The Art of War, and it's a very poor book. So his reputation as being, I suppose, political skullduggery. I think that's just nasty shenanigans up to and including kind of bumping off your opponents. This kind of thing. That's what we would mean by Machiavellian. I suppose sometimes we use the term Byzantine intrigue as well, don't we? So Dune Messiah, it's much more political. It's about intrigue and conspiracy, I suppose, and the culminations of that in a power grab. And it's much more focused, I suppose. Though all of the Dune series has kind of political power plays that are the motif that Frank uses, plans within plans, etc. And that this layering of ideas and cyclical iterations is a big part of what he does to imprint upon the reader. OHG would not get commissioned these days. Old Harry's game. Yeah, I not on the BBC anyway. It's Andy Hamilton, but yeah, I think I'd agree with you. And there's some aspects of Old Harry's game that are a wee bit very on PC. I would say early on. I think a panto version of the God Emperor. Now that would be nice. And on stage, don't trust my spelling. No problem at all, David. We don't worry about things like that as long as we get the meaning. And I suppose the other thing we talk about with Dune is that there are a lot of difficult topics that can turn up with Dune. And don't be afraid to ask any questions, or if you have, I get this sometimes that people want to dance around the issues a wee bit, or afraid about asking certain questions about Dune because it does deal with some quite difficult topics. So don't be worrying about that, and we'll always, we'll work out how to phrase things and answer them with as best we can. I'll do my best to keep my language clean as well, folks. I'm not too prone to swearing on here. So hopefully we'll try and keep it as family friendly as possible. But the odd swear word never hurt anybody, I suppose. So we talked a wee bit about, I suppose, my edition. This is the one I'm going to be working with. It's a bit larger print, actually, not much than the ones that I've read before. And so it's quite nice. Dune, sort of the book itself, I suppose. Just in terms of, we were saying that the blurb by Arthur C. Clarke is missing from this edition, and it's one of the most famous quotes about Dune, I suppose. But before we get into it, let me see. We were talking about, it's voted the greatest science fiction novel, and it's considered the best. I think that's a bit of propaganda sort of thing. Excuse me, the best-selling science fiction novel. It's not. So there's just one other thing I want to tell you about Dune, and it's before we begin, and it's an important thing to know, because if we only get through Dune, we're pretty certain of a certain thing, if you like. And this is my own way of putting it, but Dune is a deceit against its reader. And as a comment on the reader, as much as anyone. Okay, and that's my way of putting it. This book is designed, and I'm hoping to open your eyes to this a bit, to show you how it's done, to show you how good a writer Frank Herbert really is. Actually, this book is designed to trick you, hook, line, sinker, and copy of Angling Times. and it tricks its readers very successfully. And I'm going to give you Frank's own words on this, by the way. And if you want, I'm going to read you this wee section. This is from Frank. This is from the book Frank Herbert, by Timothy O'Reilly. And as somebody pointed out the other day, this book is, I think, at the Timothy O'Reilly. Would it be their website? I'm not too sure where, but if you search for it, I think there's a free online copy of this book if anybody wants to check it out. So I'm quoting you from Frank Herbert by Timothy O'Reilly from page 189. And this is Frank himself. This is the words of Frank Herbert. Dune was set to imprint on you, the reader, a superhero. I wanted you so totally involved with that superhero in all his really fine qualities. And then I wanted to show what happens in a natural evolutionary process and not betray reason or process. And then just to go on with that, just to finish off this, so he's wanting to imprint an idea upon you. And I suppose this is the conversation between Timothy O'Reilly and Frank Herbert in the book. Just following this quotation's from the same page. It's basically Timothy O'Reilly asking him what's the end goal. So when asked, and this is in quotations, what is the final judgment? Herbert replied, and again in quotations, maybe the judgment is on you. So I think it's really important to understand that Dune is a critique of the hero, and in particular some other things as well. But it's our role in the creation of that hero, and our role in the process of how that hero rises to become what he ends up becoming. So it's just to get off this whole idea that Herbert's quite subtle about what he does. He is the whole intent of Dune is to trick you, to create such an admirable hero, such a wonderful hero that we totally root for and support in every way, and that we can justify that support for this person. And we're going to follow him all the way on his journey and totally root for him. And it's the question that we'll get through these books, hopefully. We should be asking ourselves, why do we follow this person? And it is about, what does it say about us? And one of the major themes of Dune is about that messianic compulsion that periodically overtakes the masses, as Frank puts it. And it's not just these people that rise to power, particularly charismatic, particularly competent, particularly dangerous people who rise to power. It's the systems of power that build up around them, the systems of power and influence that are filled by normal people, and their actions often, I suppose, take control away from the individual. And I suppose it's about even mythologizing such an individual. And we're going to learn quite a lot about the Atreides, I suppose, of this, because they're not as squeaky clean as we like to think. And one of the things that I like to point out to people is that if we do get through Dune, and we get to Dune Messiah, within the first few pages, we should be completely appalled. Who's this guy? What has he done? I should at the very least be quite unsure of myself in terms of supporting this character, And of course, when we get to the God Emperor, he himself is, I suppose, a character that teaches some of the lessons that are reiterated in the book. But he's much, much worse. And of course, we love these characters, don't we? And that's the paradox about Frank Herbert's work. Excuse me. So it is Frank poking at us, the reader. It's a critique against power and leadership, and it seems very keen to educate in terms of ecology and evolution, about the dangers of the systems that we build within our society. There's so many things. I think about the role, all sorts of things within Dune. And as I said, as much as it's a product of its times, the Dune series is written over arguably the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So it's a product of 4 different decades. And as such, This, I suppose, Frank grows and evolves as a writer during that time, and so does the Dune narrative. So there's a longevity to Dune that's not common in all science fiction books. And I suppose that one of the things we're going to have a wee look at is why. Why is it still considered pretty fresh? Why is it still considered a pretty important science fiction book? And why is it still considered the best science fiction book that's been written, I suppose? So, yeah, it's really looking forward to this, to be honest with you. I have to say, it's one way of looking at these things, and hopefully, I suppose, sharing all of this information and seeing what you guys can bring to the party as well, So, that's it, I suppose, in terms of this new book that I bought. It's a nice enough edition. Good size in the hand. One of the interesting things that I've always commented about the Dune series is the terminology in the books is only really presented in Dune itself. We don't get things like that in the rest of the books to help us out a wee bit. So just a wee quick chat about this book anyway, and I suppose how we're going to look at it. The book itself, if you like, is broken up into 11 sections. And we'll start with the first one, is the dedication, if you like. And it's quite a famous dedication. And just read it to you. So this is to the people whose labors go beyond ideas into the realm of real materials, to the dryland ecologists, wherever they may be, in whatever time they work. This effort at prediction is dedicated in humility and admiration. So, Dune is dedicated to dryland ecologists, and it also, in Frank's own words, considers it an effort at prediction, which is a bit worrying. So that's our dedication, and one of the things we like to talk about is that Dune is very famous for its ecological message. And if you know me, I suppose, and I've been on the station for a wee bit, it's one of the things that I'm quite worried about and quite sad about the Denis Villeneuve film, is that the ecological message seems to have been wiped out from Dune, which is kind of a hard concept to put into your head when we consider that it's one of the major themes of the story. Bab says that Messiah puts folk off because Paul is portrayed so different than in Dune. Book 2, we get the other view of being the winner. But he's grown, I suppose. But I think his character is consistent. It is the portrayal. As I said, the book. It's the shift maybe of the focus from Dune is much more an adventure story, action driven to a degree. That it has all this wonderful philosophy and immersion in culture. But we've kind of got to know the Fremen way of life, and I think the other part about Babs is that it takes us more back into away from the Fremen way of life, into the city and the politics surrounding the court. And then I suppose Children of Dune then kicks off again. We get that more of an adventure story again, more that kind of feeling. As I like to say, that book I think has a much more of a feel of the Arabian Nights, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's why. Yeah, I don't know. Some of us just like different types of books, I suppose. And it's interesting when writers sort of bring different styles to the party, if you like. But I think Messiah is a very much more politically charged, as we said, Machiavellian, and I think very tightly written book. I think that's one. It's one of my favorites actually in the series. Brad's asking, hey Doc, busy but listening. Will you start at chapter 1 or with the short story in the appendix? It's a really good question, Brad, and I've been struggling with that one because I really would like to start it with that. But I think depending if we do have some new readers, I thought arguably the best way to run through the book is the way that Frank intended. And so, no, we're going to have a wee look at the appendices, have a wee quick chat about them tonight as we're looking at the different sections of the book. But it's a good point, and arguably, I suppose, what is past is prologue, and Brad's talking about pretty much as our first appendix, isn't it? Where are you? Appendices, the ecology of Dune. Yeah. And it does it. The first appendix is, it reads, it is a little mini adventure, and it tells us so much. But I suppose, in terms of where it's positioned in the book, one of the things I suppose we also mention is that people don't read the appendices. And I don't know if you're used to reading books, things like The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit and things, where particularly books with maps in it and stuff, we tend to have a wee nosy at them with terminology that's presented for us. It means that we kind of have a good way of having this kind of stuff. If we didn't know it was there, I suppose you wouldn't know it was there, but it's in the contents page. But some people read books differently and maybe just proceed page to page. This is kind of why we wanted to have a wee chat about this stuff tonight, Brad, because it really is helpful, the information that Herbert gives us. So if for anybody wants to have a wee nosy through this before Sunday, the appendices are pretty important. So we've just covered the first part of the book, is the dedication. The next thing, really part two, I suppose, is that we have this map of Arrakis, and you can get wee sort of picture versions of this online. And it has certain language in it. If we have a wee look at it, we see that there's a big arrow here to the west saying 20 thumpers to Palmares of the south, Habana Erg, Cave of Birds. There's little maps with dots and stuff, and botanical testing stations, siege communities. And it's a little thing, wonder what this is about, this place, And the wee map's worth having a wee look at. The next thing that goes with it, I suppose, the third thing that we have in the book, are the cartographic notes for the map. And they give away a few things if we're reading the book. Just literally we're going page to page. So nothing massive, but once we get in there, we've got 4 characters mentioned in the cartographic notes for the map: Pardo Kynes, Liat Kynes, Leto, and Paul Muad'Dib. So the interesting thing, I suppose, about that is it describing the Great Flat says it lies about 100 meters above the blade. Somewhere in the flat is the salt pan which Pardo Kynes, brackets father of Liat Kynes, discovered. At the Harg Pass entry, it says this is where the shrine of Leto's skull overlooks this pass. And then the old gap talks about a crevice in the Arrakeen shield wall down to 2240 meters, blasted out by Paul Muad'Dib. So we get Leto, Paul Muad'Dib, Liat Kynes, and his father Pardo mentioned just in these different little notes. We see that there's a worm line. And apart from that, nothing much else of note. There's some people mentioned in this. Excuse me. But the interesting thing, I suppose, is that comes after the contents page. And of course, Dune itself is divided into 3 books: Dune, Muad'Dib, and the Prophet. And if we've just nipped over the page, I wonder what this Muad'Dib thing is. Well, straight away within the notes, well, it's a person called Paul Muad'Dib. So it's very easy for us to figure out, almost by accident, that Paul is Muad'Dib right at the start before we've begun the story. And it's just, I suppose even you wonder why is the map not at the back, and why are the cartographic notes not at the back of the book along with everything else, But it's an interesting little thing. So within then the Dune novel, I suppose the book is divided into 3 books: Dune, Muad'Dib, and the Prophet, and that makes up the bulk of the story. And then at the back we have 4 appendices. They're called the Ecology of Dune, the Religion of Dune, a report on the Bene Gesserit motives and purposes, and the Almanac on Ashraf, which is selected excerpts of the noble houses. And then the last thing that we have, which is not considered an appendix, is the terminology of the Imperium. So for those of us who are going to read this for the first time, we're going to encounter all sorts of words. I'm going to have a bother with a few of them. They're going to come from languages from all over the world. They're going to come from cultures from all over the world. And a whole bunch of them are, and they're also meant to be this future, far future society that we're looking at, even though it has this kind of retardation to its own society because of the Butlerian jihad. We're meant to be looking at, I suppose, a timeline that's meant to be 20,000 years beyond Samuel Butler's machine revolt, if you like. And we'll get to that for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about. But Samuel Butler's Erawan is a book published in 1872, and it's a massive influence on Frank Herbert's Dune. It's a very well hidden influence, and we get the term Butlerian jihad within the first chapter, etc. But there's an awful lot to do with that. I suppose that Dune actually presents a realistic timeline as if Butler's ideas happened. So we're looking at a society that's far, far down the road from where we are now, tens of thousands of years. We're seeing ideas of how language and culture have changed, morphed, and survived all the way down. And particularly how that's done, I suppose that we're going to be looking at different variations of evolution within the human species, and in particular, we don't really have alien beings. The real alien that we do have in Dune is the worm, and the worm's not native to Arrakis, and there's a strong suggestion that the worm is probably created in a lab somewhere, quite possibly old Earth. And the worm is actually a genetically engineered hybrid. It is a half plant, half animal. So that, yeah, there's all sorts of things. And again, there are ideas in these books from reality. The animal that the worm is based on is the sea lamprey, for example. And we get a complete life cycle for this animal. So in terms of looking and studying, or it's not supposed studying, but just understanding and having a look at Dune, the ecology of Dune really lets us into the motivations of Pardo Kynes, the ecologists, how they think,